There are 5 people on that boat. 2 of them make it home. The other 3 are still out there somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. In October 1982, a 58-foot sailing yacht called the Trashman left the coast of Maryland on what should have been the most routine job in professional sailing. Deliver the boat to its new owners in Florida. 6 days, 2,000 kilometers of open Atlantic. For people who sailed for a living, it barely qualified as a story worth telling. It became one of the most documented survival ordeals in maritime history. The crew was experienced. Captain John Lippeth knew these waters. His girlfriend Meg Mooney was aboard. Deborah Scaling Kiley was 24 years old and had already become the first American woman to complete the Whitbread round-the-world race, a 70-kilometer circumnavigation that most sailors never attempt once. Brad Kavanaugh was steady and capable. Mark Adams had come along as a friend. 5 people. A straightforward passage. An ocean they all thought they understood. What none of them fully knew was the condition of the boat beneath them. The Trashman was aging. Its hull and rigging had gone too long without proper maintenance. There were structural weaknesses that had been left unresolved. The boat was making the trip on a margin far thinner than anyone aboard realized. The first 2 days were calm. Then the storm arrived. What hit the Trashman off North Carolina was not a squall. The winds reached 110 miles per hour. The swells rose to 40 and 50 feet, walls of water that Kavanaugh later described as liquid granite. The sea did not build gradually, it collapsed onto them. One moment the Trashman was fighting through heavy weather. The next, it was going over. The yacht capsized and began to sink. Fast, in those first minutes, the crew had one task: get off the boat before it pulled them under. Mark Adams inflated a small Zodiac life raft, 11 feet long. The crew threw themselves into it as the Trashman disappeared beneath them. All 5 made it, wet, shaking, but alive. Then Deborah Scaling Kiley looked at the water around them. The minute we got in, she said years later, there were fins everywhere. Not 2 or 3, 10, 20, they were everywhere. The sharks had arrived. What drew them was blood. During the chaos of the capsize, Meg Mooney had been badly cut on her arms and legs. Blood was already mixing into the Gulf Stream. And in those waters off North Carolina, tiger sharks had already gathered at the wreckage. They were not circling at a distance. They were present, active, and close. The raft was 11 feet long. Some of the sharks were longer. For the first hours, the crew held together. They stayed inside the raft. They kept their limbs out of the water. One shark seized the bowline in its jaws and dragged the tiny vessel at full speed. Kavanaugh and Kiley improvised an anchor from a piece of plywood. The moment it hit the water, another shark grabbed it and dragged them again. They had heard a plane pass overhead before the Trashman went down. Kavanaugh told the others the Coast Guard knew they were out there. Help was coming. It did not come. By the second day, dehydration was taking hold. No fresh water, no food, no shade. Their bodies were deteriorating faster than any of them could slow. And then on day 3, John Lippeth, the captain of the Trashman, went over the side. Severely dehydrated, his mind gone from the combination of sun and salt and thirst, Lippeth became absolutely convinced he could see land. Before anyone could reach him, he went into the Atlantic. Deborah Scaling Kiley described what happened next in every account she ever gave. A single scream, she said. Blood-curdling. Then it was over. Silence. There was no doubt what got him. The sharks got him. One day later, Mark Adams followed. By day 4, Adams was as far gone as Lippeth had been. He told the others he was going to the store to buy beer and cigarettes. Kiley and Kavanaugh tried to hold him. They could not. Adams entered the water. What happened beneath the raft in the seconds that followed was something Kiley said was the most horrifying moment of her entire life. Not the storm, not the sinking. What happened when Mark Adams went in? The raft lurched and spun as the sharks hit it from below. Adams did not surface. 3 dead, 2 left. Meg Mooney had not gone into the water, but the wounds from the capsize had been doing their quiet work for days without treatment. The infection spread. On the morning of day 5, Kiley and Kavanaugh woke to find her gone. They undressed her carefully, saving her clothes and jewelry to return to her family if they survived. They recited the Lord's Prayer and Psalm 23 together in an 11-foot rubber boat in the middle of the Atlantic. Then they lowered Meg Mooney into the sea. We tried to sleep afterward, Kiley said, so we wouldn't have to watch. 2 people remained. Both burned, both dehydrated to the edge of organ failure, both infected. By day 5, both had accepted they were probably going to die. Then Brad Kavanaugh saw something on the horizon. The Soviet cargo vessel Olenogorsk, approximately 100 miles southeast of Morehead City, North Carolina. After 5 days adrift, Deborah Scaling Kiley and Brad Kavanaugh were pulled from the Atlantic. 3 were not. The investigation that followed raised questions the maritime industry found uncomfortable. Why had the Trashman been allowed to make the delivery in its condition? Why, when a plane had passed directly overhead before the sinking, did no rescue reach them in time? These questions were never fully resolved. The answers, if they exist, are somewhere in the files of an inquiry that concluded without accountability for the 3 people left in that water. Deborah Scaling Kiley returned to the sea. She wrote 2 books. She died in Mexico in 2012 at the age of 54. The cause was never disclosed. Brad Kavanaugh still works on the water. In an interview decades later, he said he has never stopped living in crisis mode. Every day, he said, he is trying to solve whatever the problem is. The Trashman is on the floor of the Atlantic. 3 of the 5 people who abandoned it are still out there in the same ocean. But what you are about to hear next was different in almost every way. Different ocean, different decade. The decision that killed them was not made by an aging boat or a failing system. It was made in 30 seconds, on a perfect day, with the water completely flat and the sun still warm. And once it was made, there was no way to take it back. In 2010, 5 friends friends set out from the coast of Western Australia aboard a yacht they were delivering to new owners in Indonesia. Among them was a man named Warren, who had taken on the delivery job and brought friends along for what was supposed to be an adventure. The weather was clear. The boat was moving well. Everything was going exactly as planned. Then the yacht hit a reef. The impact was sudden and violent. The hull was compromised immediately. The boat began taking on water, and the crew understood within minutes that it was not going to stay afloat. They had a decision to make, and they had to make it fast. Stay with the vessel and wait for rescue, or swim toward Turtle Island, a small landmass visible in the distance, close enough to see. The water between them and it looked manageable. It was not manageable. 4 of the 5 decided to swim. 1 stayed with the boat. What none of them fully understood in that moment was the nature of the water between them and that island. The Indian Ocean in that area moved. The currents that run through the reef systems of northern Australia are powerful and unpredictable, and they make distances deceptive. What looked like a difficult swim was something far more serious. And the sharks that patrolled those waters were tiger shark, patient, persistent, capable of taking adults cleanly and completely. The 4 swimmers entered the water. By the time a passing fishing boat reached the area the following day, only 1 person from the original crew of 5 was still alive. The survivor was the one who had stayed with the boat. The 4 who had decided to swim did not make it to Turtle Island. They did not make it at all. Their bodies were never recovered. 1 person stayed. 1 person survived. The decision was made in the same 30 seconds that the others made theirs. That was the entire difference. The story became the basis for the Australian film The Reef, released in 2010. But the film is a compression. What actually happened took longer and was quieter, and involved real people who had names and families who are still living with the outcome. Stay with the boat. Every maritime survival protocol says it. The wreck is visible. Rescue looks for the wreck, not for swimmers a kilometer away from it, but in the moment, with a boat going under you and an island you can see with your own eyes. The calculus does not feel that simple. Sometimes it is not the water that kills you. It is the decision you make about the water. But even that does not approach what happened 35 years earlier, in the middle of the Pacific, when the largest maritime shark disaster in recorded history unfolded over 4 days and nights. While hundreds of men waited for a rescue the Navy did not know to send. It was July 30th, 1945. The heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis had just completed one of the most secretive missions of the war, delivering the components of the atomic bomb that would later be dropped on Hiroshima. The mission was classified at the highest level. Almost no one outside the operation knew the ship had made the run. What that secrecy meant for the men aboard the Indianapolis would only become clear days later. Shortly after midnight on July 30th, 2 Japanese torpedoes struck the Indianapolis. The explosions were catastrophic. The ship sank in 12 minutes. Of the approximately 200 men aboard, around 300 died in the sinking. The remaining 900 went into the water. The Indianapolis had been operating under radio silence as part of its classified mission. Its scheduled arrival at its next port of call had not been properly logged in a way that would trigger an automatic search if it failed to appear. The systems that should have noticed the ship was missing did not notice. The ship went down in the middle of the Pacific, and the Navy did not send anyone to look. The sharks arrived on the first morning. Oceanic white-tip sharks, deep water hunters that patrol the open Pacific. Drawn by blood and the sound of the explosions and the mass of men in the water, they did not leave. What followed over the next 4 days is described by survivors in terms that are difficult to hold in the mind. The sharks moved through the groups of men methodically, taking the wounded first, the ones who had swallowed oil, the ones who had lost consciousness and were floating motionless at the surface. By the time rescue arrived, the sharks had learned the difference between the men who moved and the men who did not. By the second day, dehydration was producing its own casualties. Men began drinking seawater. Seawater does not hydrate, it accelerates dehydration, drives up salt levels in the blood, and produces hallucinations that are indistinguishable from reality. Men became convinced they could see land or fresh water just below the surface. They broke from the groups, they dove, they did not come back up. The same pattern that had killed John Lippitt on the Trashman was killing men across the Pacific at a scale that has no comparison in the history of shark attacks. The rescue came on August 2nd, 4 days after the sinking, when a patrol aircraft on a routine mission spotted the oil slick and the men below. The pilot descended and understood immediately. He called it in. By the time rescue vessels reached the scene, 316 men were still alive. Of the 900 who had entered the water, nearly 600 had died. Historians and survivors estimate that approximately 850 were taken by shark. 150 men over 4 days, while the United States Navy failed to notice that one of its heavy cruisers had disappeared. The commanding officer of the Indianapolis, Captain Charles McVeigh, was court-martialed for the loss of his ship. He was the only captain in the history of the United States Navy to be court-martialed for losing a vessel in combat. He received letters from the families of the dead for the rest of his life. In 1968, Charles McVeigh took his own life. He was found on his lawn in Connecticut, holding a toy sailor in his hand. The United States Congress passed a resolution exonerating him in the year 2000. 55 years after the sinking, 32 years after his death, 3 stories, 3 oceans, 3 different decades. The Trashman sank because a poorly maintained boat was sent on a passage it should not have made, and when the storm came, there was no rescue. 3 people died, waiting in an 11-foot raft while tiger sharks circled beneath them. 4 people swam toward an island they could see from a sinking boat and did not reach it. 1 person stayed. 1 person survived. 900 men men went into the Pacific Ocean in 1945 and waited 4 days for a navy that did not know they were there. More than half of them did not wait long enough. The ocean does not ask how experienced you are. It does not ask whether the decision you made seemed reasonable in the moment you made it. It simply responds to what is in the water. What is in the water in every one of these stories is people who ran out of time before anyone came.